Good morning. For its 1996 Man of the Year, Time magazine chose a physician with a heartfelt commitment to eradicate HIV, a physician who championed combination antiretroviral therapy, including the use of protease inhibitors, a physician dedicated to developing a vaccine. His name, Dr. David Ho. Time Man of the Year for 1996, Dr. David Ho was the keynote speaker for our first USCA held in Miami in 1997. I was there. Dr. Ho presented data on the promise of protease inhibitors, PIs, and had just released a study that would change the course of the HIV/AIDS epidemic and prolong the lives of people living with HIV/AIDS. I'm certain we did not understand all of the science, all that he had shared, but boy, did we clap loudly each and every time he mentioned PIs. But now today, we do know what he was talking about. He gave us the gift of hope. For the first time, the gift of hope. Reflecting back on that historic event, Dr. Ho truly spoke to us about creating a biomedical prevention agenda. To see the promise, to visualize the promise, to lay the groundwork for ending the epidemic in our lifetime. Wow, that was 20 years ago. 20 years ago. He was bold, he was brave, he was courageous, he's a visionary and a leader. As a nurse, I was thinking, here is a physician who early on in the epidemic was able to subdue a public scare by verifying the fact that there was not sufficient HIV virus in saliva to transmit AIDS to drinking glasses or eating utensils or about kissing. At USCA 1997, Dr. Ho talked about halting the AIDS virus in its tracks. The journey from those early years of the HIV epidemic to the first USCA leading up to today, the 20th anniversary of USCA, has been filled with great loss, yet rich with tremendous courage by those living with the virus and the family and loved ones who support them, to those working on the front lines of the epidemic, people like you and me. Dr. Ho's accomplishments in the area of AIDS research are vast, thus too numerous to list. He has been honored for his work in numerous other ways, including the Presidential Citizens Medal bestowed by President Clinton. He is the founding scientific director and chief executive officer of the Aaron Diamond AIDS Research Center, a world-renowned biomedical research institute. Always working at the forefront of this epic global battle, Dr. Ho continues to lead with passion, with hope, and vision. He is truly one of our heroes. Please join me in welcoming to the stage the eminent Dr. David Ho.
Good morning. Thank you, Evelyn, for that incredible introduction. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank Paul Kawada and MMAC for the honor of being back at USCA. 1996 was indeed a turning point in the HIV/AIDS epidemic, and it certainly was a privilege for me to have participated in your first conference. At that conference, as Evelyn just mentioned, I talked about the then new results with combination therapy and the underlying science that led to that treatment approach. For this morning, I would like to just review a little bit of those findings, since it's 20 years ago already, and then move on to talk about our more recent work in developing new strategies for HIV prevention, in particular, the use of long-acting agents as pre-exposure prophylaxis. Let me begin with this very simple graphic, which shows the viral load in a newly infected person spiking early on in the course of infection and then settling down to a steady level, which in the field we call set point. And that viral load set point is prognostic in that the higher the viral load, the worse the outcome of that infected person. And we know that that viral load is maintained not only for weeks and months, but in fact years and at times decades. And that seeming calmness actually belies what's happening with HIV replication. And we uncovered this HIV dynamics through the use of new drugs such as protease inhibitors by abruptly changing the dynamics of what we observed. So if you look at this set point as someone running on a treadmill, his or her position does not change with time. Yet his feet or her feet are moving at a certain speed forward, whereas treadmill is moving at the same speed backwards. But if you could abruptly stop the treadmill, the speed with which that person moves forward will define the kinetics of what's going on. And indeed, this steady state that we see on this slide, if we could abruptly shut off virus replication, the decline tells us how fast the virus is cleared. And since it's a steady state, the clearance has to equal production. So that is the concept that allow us in early 1994 to administer drugs to patients and watch the virus fall in such dramatic fashion for the very first time, as you could see on these three examples. And by carefully analyzing the rate of decay and putting in a fair amount of laboratory work as well as mathematical analysis, we were able to figure out the dynamics of HIV replication in a person. And I will just tell you that dynamic is truly impressive and relentless. And I will simply summarize all those results for you on this very simple slide. On the top, you have infected cells that are making virus, and the virus particles are shown in the orange color that come out of the infected cells. And then they go on to infect new uninfected CD4 T cells, and this process is continuous in an infected person. And the dynamics we reveal show that the virus particles that are made and that we detect in a viral load assay in the blood of infected person are almost always newly made, in that the half-life of virus particles in the blood is in the order of 30 minutes. So whatever you detect in a person now is freshly made. That means there's tremendous amount of virus being pumped out continuously and equal amount of virus being cleared simultaneously by our body, particularly by the liver. We also learned through those studies that the infected cells that are making virus, in fact, have a very short lifespan, in the order of a day, or a half-life of 0.7 days. So the infected cells quickly die after producing their progeny, only to be replaced by newly infected cells. And that this process goes on and on nonstop. So what does this tell us? This paints a highly dynamic nature of HIV replication. Billions to trillions of virus particles are made in the body of an infected person each day. And millions of critical cells of our immune system are being killed each day. So the implication is that we are looking at Darwinian evolution fast forward. That is, the virus undergoes 180 generations per year, whereas you and I likely to go have one progeny or a few every few decades. And also the mutation rate of HIV compared to the mutation rate of our DNA replication system is 100 to 1,000-fold faster. So the virus is constantly evolving, and therefore we could simply calculate mathematically what the chances are for the virus to make mutations to evade one drug or even two drugs. At the same time, we could calculate whether it's possible or not for the virus to make mutations to resist 3 or 4 drugs. And with that, we came to the realization that HIV was most likely not able to resist 3 or 4 drugs simultaneously, and thus treating with a combination of drugs made sense. Also, as I mentioned, this important CD4 cells are being turned over millions at a time at 5 to 6 times the normal rate during HIV infection. And this is constantly depleting a critical cell in our immune system. And therefore, logic says we ought to intervene and treat HIV as early as possible. Hence, this formulated an opinion piece that I wrote in 1995 to hit HIV early and hard. The hard part was immediately accepted in 1996, as I will show you, but the early part remained controversial for a long time. In fact, it was only last year that the SMART study revealed that treating early indeed benefited those individuals who were treated early compared to those who had deferred therapy. So, armed with the basic science information, in early 1995, we launched 3 combination therapy studies in our patients in New York. And what we saw was extremely consistent in terms of the viral load response as depicted on these 3 examples. We see a predictable decline of virus load to a level that's no longer detectable in every individuals who was treated with combination therapy. Their CD4 cell count improved, and some of the dying patients got out of bed, and some those who prepared to die began to prepare to live again. These results were presented by me and by my colleague Marty Markowitz at the Vancouver International AIDS Conference in 1996. Of course, the mood was one of celebratory, but we began to hear whispers and even cries of "what about us" from the developing world. And that was certainly noted by the entire HIV/AIDS community. But this type of control HIV replication is only control but not cure. And that is because while the combination of drugs could block this relentless replication cycle, there is a minor population of HIV hiding out in what we call resting memory CD4 T cells. And they're hiding out in a latent or quiescent way, so the drugs cannot get at that population of virus. The numbers are very small. It's in the order of 1 in a million CD4 T cells. So there's probably no more than 10 to the 5th or 10 to the 6th such cells in a body of an infected person who's completely suppressed by drugs. And yet, this is the obstacle to an HIV cure. So with our current therapies, we could put out the raging fires that's represented by this cycle or the circle on this slide, but we cannot eliminate that ember that lingers in infected person. This remains a major effort of research in the field. The lack of a cure notwithstanding, impact of combination ARV has been tremendous, as all of you know. An automatic death sentence has been transformed into a manageable disease. And many treating physicians believe that an infected person in the US with good therapy could have relatively normal lifespan. And that those whispers or cries for help from the developing world became a drumbeat in 2000 in Durban. And that motivated the entire community, the international community, to work hard to bring the life-saving medications to the developing world. And today, through PEPFAR, Global Fund, etc., 17 million people worldwide have been put on combination therapy with over 20 million person-years of lives saved. And of course, there's been a dramatic decline in global death rate due to HIV/AIDS. Yet, over 50% of the infected persons still cannot access therapy in the world. And of course, we all know the infection rate remains staggeringly high at approximately 2.1 million new infections per year. The only way we're going to put an end to this epidemic is to come up with ways of preventing transmission. And that's the group work that all of you do day to day. As scientists, we try to approach this problem through technology. And yet, we have not been all that successful in coming up with a vaccine, for example. And that's not because of lack of trying or lack of funding. In fact, it is principally due to the structural features presented by the virus, HIV. And I won't go into the technical details here, but on this slide, you could see, going from left to right on the bottom, the core of the virus, the business components of the viral envelope glycoprotein, that surface protein of the virus, is shielded by those purple structures, and those are sugars. Sugars that form a protective coat for HIV, thereby precluding their efficient neutralization by our immune system, particularly the antibodies made by our B cells. And it is because of this structural feature we still do not have a vaccine today, yet the work continues. In the meantime, many have been trying all sorts of strategies to serve as a substitute for vaccine. And one approach that has gained a great deal of traction is the use of drugs, tenofovir or Truvada as pre-exposure prophylaxis or PrEP. And this busy slide is just a summary slide of many PrEP trials that have been done in various high-risk populations, in MSM in the Americas, in African women, in drug injection users, etc. And you could see the efficacy ratio shown by the horizontal axis varies from essentially 0 to nearly 80%. So it's extremely variable, but overall it seems that there is a protective effect of some 40–50%. And what's accounting for the variability? And the answer is very simple. The drugs work, but human behavior is lacking, as depicted on this slide, where the horizontal axis shows you the drug concentration detected in the study recipients. And to the right is higher levels of drug. And on the vertical axis is the effectiveness of the PrEP study. And so if you detect drugs, it works. If you don't, it doesn't work. So it's very simple, and this should be of no surprise to anybody here, because this is a fact that's well known in the contraceptive field. Short-acting agents compared to long-acting agents do not work as well. In fact, the long-acting agents that take a human behavior out of the equation to a large extent work better by about 17-fold. So our strategy over the past few years is to see if we could come up with antiviral agents that are long-lasting, that could be administered to high-risk individuals to protect them from HIV infection. And we employ two strategies, which I will briefly describe. One is to come up with a very potent and broad monoclonal antibody that will be active against HIV, that will overcome the shield of the virus and neutralize the virus. And the other is to come up with drugs that could stay in the system for a long period of time. And I'll just share with you very quickly one example each. This slide in the light gray is the envelope glycoprotein of HIV, and in the various colors are the antibodies that have been isolated by scientists in the field from infected persons that bind to different components of that envelope glycoprotein and are able to penetrate that shield and neutralize the virus. And they fall into 5 different categories as depicted by the 5 different colors. The technical details are not important here, but these are what we call broadly neutralizing antibodies, or BNAbs. And their activity could be summarized on this slide, which is quite busy, so I'll explain it a little bit. On the horizontal axis is the concentration of the antibody increasing as you move from left to right. And the vertical axis represents the percent of viruses that are neutralized by that virus, by that antibody, in a panel of 118 HIV isolates from different parts of the world. And you could see some of them fall short of 100%, reaching 80–90%. And others are more to the left. That is, if you're shifted to the left on this graph, you're more powerful, you're more potent. And then you'll see that black line. That black line is the result of 5 antibodies put into a combination. It's obviously the best. So we wanted to come up with an engineered antibody that would be better than that cocktail of 5 BNAbs. So my colleagues and I, we generated a library of antibodies, which we call bispecific antibodies, where right arm and left arm recognize different components. Normally, our antibodies, both arms see the same thing and latch on to the same thing. Here, we are able to use technology so that, for example, the left arm would bind to the envelope glycoprotein of the virus, and the right arm would bind to the receptor, either CD4 or CCR5. And in this way, we created hundreds of bispecific antibody and systematically screened for ones that would work more potently. And we were fortunate to come up with two, shown in the red and blue lines to the most extreme left. And you could see those two antibodies are better by 1 or 2 orders of magnitude than antibodies naturally isolated from the infected person, and are superior to 4 or 5 antibodies combined into a cocktail. So we believe antibodies such as this are very promising for taking forward as part of the HIV prevention effort. And in fact, the Gates Foundation has been supporting us to advance 2 of these into the clinic as soon as possible. Another strategy is to utilize drugs that could be formulated into slow-release formulations so that they could stay in the body system for not only days or weeks, but perhaps a few months. And one drug that we've been working with is now known as cabotegravir, previously known as GSK 744. This was done in collaboration with scientists at GlaxoSmithKline. And this drug, cabotegravir, is a close cousin of a drug that many of you use, and that's dolutegravir. And just like dolutegravir, it is a very potent anti-HIV compound. You could see in the purple and blue lines that with 1 pill, the viral load falls so dramatically in the first 7 to 10 days of a person who's treated. But this drug, unlike dolutegravir, has unusual physical chemical properties as listed on the left, so that they could be formulated, they could be milled into crystals that are pure compound. And these crystals could be put into a suspension and then injected into the muscle or under the skin of a person. And the drug would leach out at a predictable rate, as shown here. And if you simply look, the horizontal axis is time after the intramuscular injection of 3 different doses of drugs, and the vertical axis is the drug concentration detected in blood. And for example, look at the red graph. The drug level remains above the desired concentrations for a matter of 12 to 16 weeks. And so it has the suitable pharmacokinetic profile to be a long-acting agent. And we were keen to see if such a long-acting agent would be protective against HIV infection. And before proceeding to human studies, we did a series of experiments in monkeys to see if this approach would be protective. And this, the first experiment done is we took 16 monkeys, 8 of which serve as controls, 8 of which received the long-acting injection. And in this case, the monkeys received the injection 1 month apart, 2 of them total. And during and following those injections, they were repeatedly challenged with intrarectal virus, and then we monitored for the outcome. And to our pleasant surprise, the very first experiment showed in this intrarectal challenge experiment that all 8 of the control animals became infected, whereas all 8 of the injected animals were protected. The next experiment is simply to say, well, what is the level of the drug that's required to achieve protection? And it's very, very simple. We give a single injection to many monkeys, and then we expect early on there would be high levels of the drug, which would then wane with time. And then we just keep challenging the animals with virus until all of them became infected. And we expect that there is a period of protection, there's a period of loss of protection, and we could determine the crossover point. And that crossover point tells us what is the protective concentration. And that's the technical information. On the top is the viral load measurement, and you could see in the first 8 weeks or so, there was protection, and then that protection was lost. And on the bottom, you see the waning concentration. And we could take these results and analyze them by bins, as shown here, and show that on the extreme left, the bin with the highest drug concentration above what we call 3x PAIC90, there were 59 virus challenges and 0 infection. And between 1x and 3x PAIC90, there were 22 challenges and only 1 infection. And then as the drug concentration got lowered, the infection rate occurred. So we, in this fashion, determine what is the protective concentration required. Now that was with intrarectal challenge. We also did an experiment using intravaginal challenge in a similar monkey model, except here we thinned the vaginal and cervical mucosa first with progestin to make the infection occur more easily in the monkey. And you could see in this model, when we did the experiment, the control animal shown in red, all 4 monkeys became infected with a single intravaginal inoculation, whereas 6 of the 8 treated monkeys were protected from infection. Now, 6 of 8 is perhaps not as high as we like, but this is a model system that is very, very different from what occurs in human beings, where each inoculation only has a minor chance of transmitting HIV. So this is a very tough challenge system. And similarly, we also did a series of experiments to look at intravenous virus challenge. And you could see in these experiments, the control animals all became shown in the dark line, that's a vertical drop. All 5 of them became infected with a single inoculation, whereas the injected animals at varying doses and on varying schedules were highly protected from cabotegravir. So we believe this is a highly promising pre-exposure prophylaxis agent because of these results. And in fact, phase 1 and phase 2 studies with this agent have been conducted. We believe the proper schedule for this is probably going to be every 2 months or so per injection. And the tolerability profile has to be good when you have a long-acting agent. And fortunately, so far, over 1,000 subjects receiving the long-acting form have not described any side effects that would preclude further development. So several phase 3 studies are now in the plans, and they will look at the protective efficacy of this injectable long-acting form of PrEP in MSM and in African women in particular. It is my hope that at a future USCA conference, say 5 years from now, we'll be talking about the high protective efficacy of such a strategy. So let me conclude by telling you that I need to give credits to my colleagues. Alan Perlson on the lower right is the mathematician I have worked with over the years to come up with the information on the viral dynamics. Marty Markowitz has been working with me for 20-some years, and he's our clinical. But the antibody work and the cabotegravir work are due to colleagues Dr. Huang, Yu, Lancy, and Andrews. And this work is supported by the Gates Foundation as well as by the NIH. Thank you very much for this honor.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. David Ho. Thank you very much, sir.